Hey everybody, it's Charles from HumbleMechanic.com. Today, I'm going to give you some tips on replacing a clutch, pressure plate, or flywheel. Replacing a clutch set is a pretty straightforward job, yet over the years I've seen a lot of bad practices while replacing it. And because I'm installing a new clutch on the GTI, I thought this was a great opportunity to share with you guys a few tips to make sure that the job goes well and your clutch lasts as long as it possibly can. So here are 5 tips for replacing a clutch set. Number 1 is to work in stages, and you'll find that this is actually a very common theme throughout the entire job. Whether you're removing parts or assembling, you want to work in stages. And what that means is you don't want to just tighten one bolt all the way, you want to tighten the bolts all together. So what you'll do is you'll tighten one bolt halfway, then another, then another, then another. Once those are all half tight, then you go back and tighten them the rest of the way, then you'll go ahead and torque them properly. You also want to work in a diagonal pattern, very similar to when you're tightening a wheel down. If the component has, say, 8 bolts, you might start at your 12 o'clock position, move to 6, then to 2, then to 7, then to 3, then to 9, then to 4, then 11, working your way around the circle, but going across the middle. So when you're tightening down the flywheel or the pressure plate, remember to work in stages. We also want to make sure that we're not using impact tools when we remove or install these components. Number 2 is to work clean. This is important whether you're taking it apart or putting it back together. On the disassembly side, you have to remember that you're working with some pretty nasty stuff. It's not uncommon for a clutch to have asbestos, metallic powder, fiberglass, ceramic, all these components as part of the friction material. And the last thing you want to do is breathe a bunch of that nasty stuff. This is especially important when you're dealing with a clutch that had catastrophic failure. You want to take really good care not to let any of that dust go up into the air. This also means do not use compressed air at all to clean any of that stuff up. The recommended way is to use a water bath and then capture that water. This is another reason that we don't want to use pneumatic tools, because that exhaust air coming out of the tool can blow that dust everywhere. On the assembly side, we want to make sure that all of our surfaces are clean. The only place you want to lubricate is the splines of the clutch, where the input shaft for the transmission goes. And you need to be really careful not to put too much lubricant on those splines. Before we put the clutch assembly together, we want to make sure all the surfaces are free of oil, grease, brake fluid, old friction material, dirt, and any grime. I always like to wear gloves during this job anyway, but this may be a point where you switch and put on a new pair of gloves to prevent any contamination from getting on the surfaces. Any of those contaminants can cause hot spots in the flywheel or in the friction plate. Number 3 is paying attention to the must-replace parts. While a clutch set replacement is not hard, there is a lot of parts. This is not a small job. It's also not cheap if you're paying someone to do it. So there's a handful of parts that you always want to make sure you replace whenever you're doing a clutch pack. The first part you want to make sure you replace is the bolts. Many flywheel bolts are torque to yield bolts, which means that they're one-time use. In the Volkswagen world, many of them have thread locker on the bolt when it's new. While you can always add your own thread locker if it's torque to yield as well, you want to go ahead and replace them. While pressure plate bolts aren't typically torque to yield, they do see a lot of heat cycling and stress. So it's really a good habit to replace those as well. Many repair manuals don't require those to be replaced, but I feel like it's cheap insurance for a good clutch job. And of course, anytime you are going that far in, you want to replace the release bearing, or what some people call the throwout bearing. This is essentially your connection from the clutch pedal to the pressure plate to engage or disengage the clutch. It has rotating parts. It also makes significant contact with the pressure plate, so it becomes a must replace in my book. I would hate for someone to spend a bunch of time and money on replacing a new clutch kit just to find that they have a noise because they didn't replace the throwout bearing. Number 4 is torque everything. Doing a clutch job should really give your torque wrench a workout. Now, I am not a torque wrench purist, and I don't think every single component you put on a car really does need to be torqued. In fact, most airbox screws have a torque setting. I'm not going to break my torque wrench out for that job. I do think this is one area you really need to pay attention to the repair manual and torque everything properly. If you don't torque it properly, not only are you running the risk of having some sort of bolt back out or fail, but you may not have proper and even clamping force on the component you failed to torque. You may also want to have a torque angle gauge or a torque wrench that does angle, perhaps a torque specification of, say, 60 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. And again, of course, this means no impact wrenches. Remember, when you're torquing these components, you want to work in stages and of course work diagonally across the component. And of course, it should go without saying, but make sure you're using the clutch alignment tool when installing the clutch. The clutch alignment tool will center the friction disc to the crankshaft. If that's not centered, odds are your input shaft for your transmission won't install properly. If for some reason it does, you'll probably have some kind of weird thing happening with your clutch. Number 5 is proper clutch break-in. This is a really important and often overlooked step, especially when you just did this really awesome build and all you want to do is go lay some rubber or really test out your car. The typical break-in time for a clutch is about 500 miles. This is about 500 miles of clutch actuation, not necessarily highway miles. After that 500 mark, you want to slowly increase the stress that you're putting on the clutch. This is actually very similar to the proper technique for breaking in a new or rebuilt engine. You do want to make sure that you are using the clutch. We want those surfaces to all mate together happily. So go ahead and use it. Just try not to baby the clutch or try not to beat the heck out of it. If you fail to properly break in the clutch, it can lead to a shortened clutch life or reduced clamping force on the clutch. And I'll be very honest with you guys, this is one I really struggle with. Like I said, especially with a really cool build, all you want to do is go drive the crap out of it, but we got to be nice to our clutch when we first install it. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Questions, comments, you know what to do. If you have any other clutch installation tips, feel free to leave them down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. Don't forget to subscribe right here on YouTube or over on the blog at HumbleMechanic.com. You can also find audio versions of the podcast on iTunes and Google. If you want exclusive contents, discounts you can't get anywhere else to places like Black Forest Industries, who supplied the clutch, MT Knives, Eastwood, Sonic Tools, and more, check out the Crude membership program. You can also throw some support on Patreon or use my Amazon link as well. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course on Snapchat. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.